The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to attack. With the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, you'll find youth and high school coaching tips for coaches, parents, and wrestlers, featuring Gable-trained NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber. Find out more on AttackStyleWrestling.com. Now, on to the show. The Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. We are back. It has been a little while. Jason Bryan here with you, along with Hall of Fame high school coach and NCAA champion Daryl Weber. Yeah, man, it's been a while. What's been going on?
It has been a while. It's been over a year since we've fired one of these up.
Yeah, it was February 22nd, 2017, and now we're recording this on September 26th. 2037. No, actually, it's 2018. It seems like it's been 20 years, but yeah, it's good to get this thing back up. As you were saying before we started, a lot of people have been asking where this is going. I had to answer a couple emails and tweets over the last couple months, like, "Hey, I'm a new parent into the sport, and I'm looking for some things that'll help my kids, and I'm a new coach and things of that nature." So we're back at it today. We're gonna jump right into it with. This is a coach's guide, 6 topics to game plan before November. But before we even get into the topic, we've got a coach's clinic coming up that you're doing at Virginia Tech on October 19th and 20th in the wrestling room at Castle Coliseum. A little bit of info there before we get into the actual tips that we will be breaking down.
Yeah, this is, it's something that a lot of people that follow me in our community have been asking for me to do a coach's clinic. And it's something I've wanted to do for a long time. And it's not like, typically your coaches' clinics in the fall are you go to the local college and they bring somebody in to show an hour or 2 hours of technique and you watch some wrestle offs. That's not what I'm going to do here with this coaches' clinic. It's basically most of the topics that we cover here are going to be covered in depth and in person. So these people, we've got over 15 people signed up already. It's going to be kind of an intimate environment where I want people to leave with, an overall game plan for the season, with everything kind of locked down, or at least that everything locked down for the beginning of the season. Is pretty dynamic. A wrestling season can get dynamic and things change, but if you're working off of a good template in these areas, I think it could help dramatically. So we put it together. Like I said, it's going to be at Castle Coliseum at Virginia Tech. I'm right here. It's right in my backyard, so it's easy. We've got some people flying in, actually, some people coming from several hours, so it should be a great event.
Yeah, a lot of things we're talking about today. This will be, you get the surface level information, some tips, tricks, and best practices, but you get the full Monty. You get everything that Daryl's going to talk about on this show as part of that coach's clinic. Again, go to TaxStyleWrestling.com. Check out that clinic October 19th and 20th in Blacksburg, Virginia at Castle Coliseum in the Hokie Wrestling Room. Now, part of that is when you're building a healthy and successful program. That is the first topic we'll discuss today. And you've had nationally ranked teams and state championship teams when you were a coach at Christiansburg High School, which was a national power it still actually is nationally relevant, but a national power in your heyday. And some of the key things that build a healthy and successful program, obviously, you got to have strong feeder. You got to have good coaches. You don't even have to have a great coach, just know the techniques right. But also, the parents are also a big point of it, and the booster club. So what are some of the key things that you found in building a healthy and successful program that worked for you at Christiansburg?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that the coaches need to do, and most of them usually have this in their head or have a gut feeling about this. But it's really to put some thought into the culture that you want to build. And that's why I call this, every time I kind of address this topic, it's not how to build a successful program, but a healthy and successful program. So, as a head coach, a program that if you walk away, it keeps going. There's processes in place and a mentality and a culture that breeds longevity. And I think the biggest thing, and this really, I didn't really plan this out when I took over as head coach at Christiansburg, but it's something that I did, and I put a lot of thought into this, and my hand was kind of forced, and it was putting together a very in-depth, detailed I call it a wrestler parent handbook. And I have one that I give out to people on my website for free, and it's 25 pages long. So when I took over the program, we were a very successful program. I don't know how healthy we were, though. There was a lot of issues when I took over, and I knew that I had to, even though I was an NCAA champ and I was taking over this high school program I had been part of for 6 years, I knew that there was going to be people that were going to try to steamroll me and get their way and change how we did things. So I put a lot of thought into all aspects of basically what to expect if you're a part of my program. And people had to sign off on this document before they came in. And I took that document to my administration, my club, my high school administration, my AD, had them look at it and make sure they were all good with it so that they would have my back if I had to make any hard decisions. So, just basically think about what kind of culture, what kind of athletes you want to breed in your program. And then you have to take it a step further and think about how are you going to do that? What has to happen? What kind of rules, expectations that you have to set, from getting good grades to showing up to practice regularly? What's going to happen if they don't? How are you going to keep the kids healthy by cleaning the mats? All the way down to those details. So I think you have to put some thought into this. You can't just kind of wing it and think that everybody knows what to expect. So I think that's a huge step that coaches really need to take. And most people probably have some kind of flyer or something like that. But like I said, I took it a lot further, and I scoured the internet and talked to other coaches. I actually got this from a football coach. I can't even remember where he was from, and then tailored things for a wrestling program.
And let's also focus on the fact that successful doesn't necessarily mean you've got to be national ranked, you got to win state team titles and things like that. Successful is based on, kind of your the contextual situation of your program. If your goal is to win half your matches in your district, say if you're a District 11 team in Pennsylvania and you're starting from scratch, you've got monster powerhouses. A successful season may be going 500 in the district or getting 3-4 kids to the state tournament. So, what is the important thing to remember when saying successful and keeping that the goals and aspirations of your personal coaching abilities in mind versus the one that's realistic with the kids?
Right. Yeah, you're 100% correct there. And I should have pointed that out. But, I think it's all about moving forward. High school youth coaches, it's not like you're a college team where you're recruiting and you're kind of cherry picking the kids that you have on your team. A lot of times you're dealing with what's coming through, and you want to do a good job of recruiting kids in your school, your school district to get on your team. But things can kind of get reset year after year, or as a phase of kids goes through. So I think you have to be realistic on where kids are, and they need to just be moving forward mentally, physically, emotionally. That they need to be moving forward. If you're doing that, and you're instilling that mentality, good things are going to happen, especially if you're teaching good technique and running good practices and have a good strength program and all of that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing to me was just always moving forward and always keeping the excitement high, handling the kids so you're not burning them out, trying to keep them excited about the sport, having a good reputation in your community, things like that. Always moving forward and always keeping that good reputation.
And while everything we're touching on today is not specifically about high school or college coaching, there are things that can be, parsed from whichever whichever level you're at. And one thing, the next part we get to is the complete practice planning and development system. Now, practice planning at the college level, vastly different from practice planning on the high school level based on the level of kids. And I want to get into this development thing real quick because it just dawned on me this is a common thing, but we've got a sport that how many other sports can you get a kid out of the hallway who has never done a sport and put him in a varsity lineup because you've got to forfeit at that weight class? You don't have 4 guys on a basketball team. Hey, this kid's never played basketball before in our life. Let's put him in the starting lineup. I mean, so development is a key part of coaching, especially at the high school level. When you've got 9th graders that have never wrestled. You might even have seniors that have never wrestled before. I mean, how do you work on that development system and then go back to, planning practice around your superstar kid who everybody looks up to, and then your football heavyweight senior who's out there to fill a spot for you?
You're exactly right again, Jason. And that's where this whole discussion is really foundation. The foundation of it is having this kind of template, this kind of baseline to work from. And that's going to allow you to make sure that your defending state champ is getting what they need in a practice or in your program, as well as a kid that you just pulled down the hallways. If you don't put thought and planning into how you're going to, run things and how you might, adapt for those different situations, you're not going to be able to do it. Somebody's going to get ignored. Either the state champ is not going to get what they need, or the newbie is going to be frustrated and probably run off, or not get the development that they need. So, and you said, it was interesting. You said it's drastically different from college to high school practices, youth practices. Yeah, they should be, but I think that there's a common framework that a practice you can use in a practice and run your practices, and then the pieces just kind of slide around a little bit depending on what you're trying to get, what level, experience level athlete you're dealing with. So for instance, personally, I developed this, and I got this from Coach Dan Mashik back when I was in high school. Every day he had a practice on his clipboard written out. I didn't do this. Personally, I didn't pin my practices up on the board for everybody to look at as they walked in the room, but that's what he did. And he had it mapped out. He knew what he was going to do, and obviously things changed if things were going different in practice. And he had probably, off the top of my head, there was 4 or 5 different practices, kind of the format of practice that we always had. Different things plugged into different places, but it was kind of the same flow. And I think that you have to have something like that to kind of work off of, to be able to adjust for the different athletes and get that development that we're talking about. So, for instance, every one of my practices starts with a talk, and we want to address logistical things that are going on, but we also want to get those core values and those expectations. And, with high school kids, youth kids, even college kids, you can't just expect to, hey, this is how things got to be done, and give them the little speech one time and it's going to sink in. It's probably going to be the 100th or maybe even the 1000th time they hear a tidbit and that it really starts to sink in. So I always started with the speech, and you got to get creative. You got to use stories. You got to tell, use examples so that you keep their attention, you get them excited. And actually, it was to the point where if I came in, and once in a while I would just try to shock them, and I'd just come in and be like, okay, let's warm up. And that was very rare, but they look shocked. They'd be like, what? No speech today, coach? So yeah, it would start with that, and then I would go into my warm up, specific. I call them quick drills, where we got good reps in, and then you go in your technique, your live wrestling, maybe more drills and conditioning. And in each of those little parts, I always knew kind of what I wanted to get accomplished. And you may say it's technique. Where, hey, coach, talk to my assistant coaches and be, hey, we're going to work on this. These 5 things we're going to work on. Everybody works on the first 3. These last 2, the big guys, the heavyweights, and the newbies, they keep working on these first 3. And explain why they're doing that, and then you have the coaches, and that organization really helped you address everybody's needs, and you could do that with drills and live wrestling and all different aspects. So I think you got to plan that out. How are you going to run practices? What's your maybe Tuesday practice where you really get after it hard? How does that look compared to your pre-match day practice, where you're taking a little bit easier? So, and you can plan out, maybe you got halls you can run for conditioning. You map that out that fits into those, in a way that it fits into those practices. Strength training, maybe you're working your strength training at the end of a workout. Where does that fit in? So I think you have to put some thought into the flow of your practices, how you're going to develop all levels, and start mapping that stuff out. Don't just think you're going to handle it on the fly once season starts.
And also a reminder, if you're new to the program, we went through the anatomy of Daryl's perfect practice plan back on episodes 17 through 20, and you can find that at attackstylewrestling.com/podcasts. So we go in depth in a lot of this stuff in some of the back catalog. So, some of this stuff is absolutely evergreen. We're talking about practice plans. We did a whole series on it back in November of 2016. So again, episodes 17 through 20, you can really get even more in depth if you can't make the clinic on the Attack Style Wrestling podcast. Moving forward, we get into practice drills and live scenarios for overall development. Again, we've talked about little quick drills like you just mentioned, but practice drills for the newbie coach and practice drills for the state championship coach really shouldn't be that varying when it comes to the high school level.
Yeah, it's all about, wrestling practice and teaching technique. Everybody wants to get hung up on technique. But really, it's all about I call it live match instincts. You want to how fast can you turn the holds that you're teaching into holds that they're executing in matches, in live wrestling and practice. And I think you have to put some thought in that. And in really each position, there's a different roadmap. Getting somebody to work a half Nelson series is different than getting somebody to set up their high crotches and know how to finish. There's different drills. It's a different combination of practice drills, sparring, play wrestling, live scenarios. They all have a role, I think, but there's just different levels of each that you use to accomplish that. So, and in the same. On the same token, I think that you have to, as a coach, you have to kind of put some thought into, okay, what positions does this team need to get good at? What are we going to focus on? Maybe you got a bunch of guys that are really good on their feet, but you don't get any pins. You lost some duels last year because you can't get any pins. Well, hey, let's figure out a good way to keep drilling our takedowns and staying sharp with that. But let's fit in some room and really pick 2 or 3 good turn series that we're going to focus on. Scenarios like that. Gable used to do that. I know Gabe. I know for a fact Gable would evaluate his teams, his athletes, and it wasn't like we rolled in every single year and there was some cookie cutter plan. Okay, this time of year we work on this. No, it was all adapted to that team and maybe the rules. You had to put some thought into it. So I think you need to put some thought into where your team, your individuals need to get good, need to develop. Maybe you got a bunch of newbies. There was a year where actually it was the year that our team was going to set the record for 13 consecutive state championships. And when we won 12, we lost a bunch of seniors. So I was looking at starting 7 freshmen in my lineup. So we worked sprawls and front headlock scoring relentlessly, because I was like, okay, these guys aren't going to be shooting in and taking down juniors and seniors, at least not right away. I got to get these guys good at defense and scoring from that defense. So you have to evaluate your team, your individuals, and then plan on, hey, how am I going to score points? How are we going to get pins? How are we going to get takedowns? How are we going to get escapes? What techniques are going to work kind of within it's going to lead into our next question, but you need to put some thought into that. And at least know the direction you're going to start that first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. Because, once you start going to competitions, things change. You got to evaluate your competitions and what's going on and develop practice plans from that.
I want to go over live scenarios for a minute because I saw a lot of this when I worked at USA Wrestling. I'd go into the training center and I'd see this is also during the leg clinch era. So we had a lot of the situational drills was, okay, leg clinch, go. You're basically the whole drill was try to defend the leg clinch when somebody has your leg. Another example even goes back to the relationship between my alma mater and your former school. It was when BJ Compton was going to wrestle. We're working Anthony Burke and BJ Compton. We know BJ Compton was a cradle guy. So what happens coaching wise, situational traditionally in live scenarios, we bring in one of our alumni who was really good and long at cradles like BJ was. And it didn't actually end up helping in that particular bout. But the point remains that live scenario, okay, you're in a cradle, get out of here. I mean, those type of live scenarios. What are some other beneficial live scenarios you feel like are almost, pivotal? You mentioned the front headlock and go behind scoring, but, from maybe a defensive capabilities, like, okay, what's one thing every kid should really know here that we need to drill over and over and over in a live scenario?
Yeah, I mean, live scenario. I mean, I think there's definitely positions where live scenarios will take you to another level quick. Finishes, starting kids out on single legs, high crotches, doubles. A lot of times in positions like that, if sometimes they never get to a leg in a practice. So if they do get to a leg in a match, they don't know what to do. So to get them good at those finishes, you start off in there, start in different situations. Leg defense. Leg defense is something you can teach all the technique you want till you're blue in the face. The best way the most success I ever had teaching leg defense, which is, top guy puts the legs in and they're working power halves, whatnot, is put them in those situations. You've shown the technique, go live for a while, short goes, maybe 30-second goes, and identify the little pieces of those techniques you've been shown that they're not doing good. And then you might put a good way to teach like leg defense is live scenario for a while and then stop and go back to teaching technique. Hey, come on, we got to work on this little part of this. And you go down to, you fine tune the technique and then you go back and do live again. You go back and forth there. That's a really big one. Top positions. Getting kids good with pinning combinations. One thing that I always had to do when you start them off, because sometimes, if you're working a cradle, or maybe they don't get it, maybe they just can't get a cradle locked up. But then they do in a match and they don't know what to do. So you got to put them in there, start them in there so they know how to finish, get the pin, get the turn. And then when you do those live situations, if you start them off in a half Nelson, inevitably you're going to blow the whistle and somebody is going to just let go of the half and do what they like to do. You have to kind of get on them and say, listen, we're starting the half. If anybody lets go of the half when I blow the whistle, you got to legitimately try to get it. If anybody just lets go, this doesn't count. We're going to keep doing it. You got to get this move down. So those are just kind of some examples of, combining technique, drills, live scenarios, play wrestling, in some really common positions that I think you need the scenarios in.
When we move to the next point, constructing your program's technique system, this is something I think is very regional in nature because when you go down to the Virginia Beach area, especially 20-some years ago, everybody and their mother not just knew the Granby series, whether it be the Martins or the Lawrence or whatever, they knew how to counter it. And so, you're not really seeing a whole lot of everybody Granbying the heck out of each other because they knew that was the whole style of the area. Then when they travel up, say, to the Northeast where they didn't see a whole lot, they saw a whole lot of success in hitting what was basically their practice room moves. Like, yeah, everybody knows it. Here's the opportunity to use it. Now, I'm out in Colorado and I see Pine Creek High School in Colorado Springs Wrestling, and I see a lot of 2-on-1 tilts. Not a whole lot of other high schools in the area were using this. And I know some schools had guys that came out east and they would take systems with them and implement this technique system. From a coach that's stepping into a room for the first time versus a coach that's been building his system for 20 years, what are the important things to learn when developing a technique system for kids, whether it be high school or college, to learn and implement?
Yeah, I think you got to have, there's basics across the board. You got to know how you got to have a good stance. You got to know how to sprawl. You got to know how to, clear your legs when a guy gets in on a double leg or single leg. You got to know those basic defenses. You got to, you got to know your basic penetration steps. The basics. You got to know a stand up and a sit out, whatever you want to work on the bottom. And then the top position is really where I think it can be a lot different. You got to kind of decide what you want to get good at. And, I think there's kind of tiers of difficulty when it comes to top series. Obviously, I think everybody should have a half series and a cradle, some kind of cradle series, and, a chicken wing. But then you can get into your tilt, then you kind of get personalized with your teams, and you get a little tilt series. And when I was coaching, I would purposely rotate through these series that we focused on. So we would, there'd be a year or two where we would turn everybody with cross wrist tilts. And then after about that second year or so that you're doing this, then you start to go against these better programs, and they're got their kids coached up and they're defending it. So then the next year we would go to, we would work our cradles really hard and kind of catch people off guard, and that would be good for a year or two. And you kind of rotated through those. They had to have a good understanding of all the basic turns and the top position and the breakdowns. But we would, as a team, we would really sink our teeth into different turn series, and you had to put some thought into that. And some things might just play right into one another. If a defense that people were adapting fell right into another move, well, I might sink my teeth into that one. So I think that's the top position. But, and then bottom position, I always used to put together, especially the last couple of years I coached, I called it my bottom master skill set. So it was a handful of moves that everybody had to be able to execute perfectly. A stand up. Okay, a stand up when somebody grabs your ankle, do you know what to do? A stand up if somebody chops you, do you know what to do? Some scenarios through that, you had to have one or two basic leg defenses. When somebody throws the legs, just kind of it wasn't a ton of moves. It was the ones that probably took care of 95% of the problems. And then you would work on little things throughout the season that you ran into. And then in the neutral position, you have, to me, if you want to get kids good quick, get them in good stances, get their feet moving, good sprawls, knowing how to clear the legs, how to work from front headlocks, and then start, you're always developing those leg attacks, but sometimes those take longer to develop. And then, you work on those basic leg attacks and the highest percentage finishes. These are just, thought process that I go through when I'm putting together a technical series. But definitely, you got to look at your team and look where you're good and how you're going to score points and build that. I call it like you want to build a horizontal then vertical system within your program. So you want to cover all the bases, get them good in, the main positions, and then start building upward, adding on to those basic positions once they get those baselines down.
Now, when you're talking about building a technique system, you also just mentioned that when you cycle through your series is that teams would figure it out. When you're building your technique system, how much do you have to build in, the scouting aspect of it? And I'll use another example from some kids we know. Daniel Frischkorn, when he wrestled at Great Bridge High School, was one of the best in the country, but he could not, and even in the college, he could not beat Corey Cooperman because Coach Buxton at the time at Blair Academy had it scouted so well. He knew that there's no way that this guy's good stuff is going to work on Corey. It was just something about the way he taught it. And from a defensive or a scouting capability, how do you build a training system in to prepare and adjust for, a team that may be good with your cross wrist series, for example?
Yeah, I think, that all comes from having a good foundation under you. And once you have that foundation in the, those main positions, then, you can look at maybe a team or individual, and you can add things really quick and easy. So once if kids have been in a program and they've got a good foundation, they just haven't been, their coach hasn't been, if your coach just trying to teach you a million moves, every cool move that comes out, they're trying to figure it out. Well, they're not going to have much of a foundation. They're not going to be really good in many positions. So I think, and that's definitely, you got to have and you want to be good where you want to be good. You don't want to go, worry about what the other person is going to do, that you're going to get in trouble then. But you do, when you get to that higher level, you do have to be able to tweak things. You don't want to take them out of your game plan, but you just got to, you got to be aware. The best way to scout somebody or to beat somebody that's good is to absolutely force your style onto them. Don't change a dang thing. Just stay in their face and force your style. Now, if they got some dangerous moves or dangerous positions, like a Granby guy, if you got to deal with that, you got to know how to handle that. But the best thing you can do is just force your style, get so good on your style, and force your positions relentlessly, and break your opponents with that, solid wrestling in your face. But yeah, you're right. There was a time when I remember a time. We went up and wrestled. We had a pretty good team, and we went up and wrestled. I can't remember who it was, but they did Russian ties, 2-on-1 Russian ties, and we didn't work a lot of Russian ties, and they just shut us down. Our guys did not have a clue, and this is my fault. I didn't have them prepared, but we started working Russian ties into our system, not necessarily for offense all the time, unless somebody just really liked it, but to know how to get the heck out of it and have a feel there. So yeah, we had this team. They just shut us down offensively on our feet because our guys didn't know what to do when a guy got a Russian 2-on-1. So yeah, we had to address that. And like you said, growing up on the East Coast or wrestler coaching on the East Coast, you better have a good Granby defensive system, or you're going to get rolled up sooner than later.
Moving to our next topic is how to build year-long peaking systems and strategies. And this can also vary because some schools are just, we don't have a big freestyle emphasis here. So the summer peaking may not be into that, and kids can get that on their own with various clubs or whatnot. But when you're looking at it from controlling what you can control, whether it's your feeder program, and maybe you have an off-season club that goes into freestyle or Greco-Roman, building the year-long peaking systems and strategies, what does that entail?
Yeah, obviously it starts November 15th or whenever the first day of practice is. And then you got to understand how to peak your team for the postseason, 3 or 4 months later. And then from there, and I always say this, the number one goal come after the state tournament, your number one off-season goal as a coach is to make sure your athlete is excited to wrestle next November 15th. That's number one. Now, some kids are going to do everything you could possibly put in front of them, and they're still going to be excited. And you got to recognize that and get them all the development they can. Some kids might just want to lift weights. Some kids might want to go play other sports. You got to be able to recognize that, and that all comes into that peaking system. And I think, if you're a coach that is able to, because of your state rules, or you're interested in kind of staying involved year round, I think you kind of look at where your guys are. And if you've got nationally ranked kids, you have a path for those kids. And if you got kids that, you're just trying to get good for next year, but they're committed and they want to do some stuff in the off season, we'll have a path for that. And then you got to have like your ideal path. And then you got to have like the tier below that for the kids that you can kind of see maybe they don't want to wrestle in the off season. Well, then let's get to strength training. Maybe you can't even get them to that. Well, then, you got these different paths, and you got to recognize where kids are. And I think you got to, like I said, you got to put some thought into that, and you got to it's important to know your kids and get to know them during the season, and kind of know what makes them tick and try to motivate them to do the right thing. So you got to put some thought into that. And there's a lot of different, schedules that you can put together and tactics. And like you said, maybe you're a coach that can't coach your guys in the off season, or maybe you coach other sports, or you got a job and you can't do it. Well, put some literature together for your motivated kids and make sure they know where to go, or maybe line up rides for 2 or 3 of them that want to go to some club or something like that.
Now, what about getting kids to peak? And this is the one thing that I think is probably inherently unique to individual sports, especially ones like wrestling, is getting kids to peak at all at the same time. How are you going to get 14 high school kids to be, hitting that stride going into the postseason, whereas somebody may have hit it 2 weeks ago? They may hit it, 2 weeks later at the state tournament. How do you make sure, how hard is it to manage 14 individual starters on a high school team and making sure they're peaking close to the same time?
There's a lot that goes into that. I think it's scheduling. It's the message that you're preaching from day one. The team I talked about earlier, the team that we had that was, half freshmen it was half freshmen, and we were going to set the state record for any sport. They had this tradition to uphold. They had this record hanging that everybody was talking about. And like I said, it was just a bunch of young kids. So day one, I just started talking about just putting your best foot forward and letting them know, hey, you know what? You're going to lose. You're going to get your butt kicked this season. And this is how you got to handle it. This is what you got to do. You got to kind of look and see what kind of obstacles that they're going to, that your teams or your athletes are going to hit, and you got to prep them for it, how to deal with it. It goes back to the culture, setting the culture and setting the expectations and being realistic. Like you talked about, trying to develop all different levels, being realistic. If you take them to a big tournament, and a bunch of them lose, well, you got to look at their effort, not the results. So it's just the attitude you develop, the culture, what you talk about regularly, how you react to certain situations as a coach. How well you've coached up some parents, how much pressure are they putting on the kids. The whole on being not able to peak at the end of the year. A lot of that's just pressure. One of the first things I used to tell every team we had, we'd look up at the board in our wrestling room with all the state champs and the team state titles, and I'd tell them, hey, look up there. I don't care if your name's up there. I don't care if it's not up there. It doesn't matter. If you're up there, forget about it. It's a new year. You got to start over. You got to prove yourself again. You can't rest on those laurels. So it's it's what you talk about. It's the culture you build. It's the attitude that you instill to keep things in perspective. So they know how, and they know how to deal with pressure. And there's tactics for dealing with pressure. There's meditation tactics and visualization tactics so that you can use and teach your wrestlers under high pressure situations.
Moving to our final point on this episode, developing complete strength and athleticism for all ages and levels. And this is something that when coaches, I'm going to single out those that walk the hallways that may not have a middle school program. You'll look around, you're looking for the kid that just looks athletic. They look like they could, set up, take them to the basketball gym and they can go up and they can grab the rim without ever picking up a basketball. They can sit there and just run off a wall, bounce off a wall. You've got those natural athletes. Then you've got the kids who you have to train and teach to be a little more flexible, to be a little more athletic. It's not natural to them. When you have such a range of kids that you can, have a kid come off as a 13, 14-year-old, come in 8th grade, 9th grade, pick up the sport and just run with it, versus a kid that's been wrestling since he's 5, but still isn't as good as that kid that just started this year. So when we look at those strength and athleticism tips, tricks, and drills, what are some of the basics that you need to teach right off the bat, regardless of how athletic a kid may be?
Well, this is a topic that really frustrates me because 90% of people out there, if you start talking about strength training, they think they know. They don't want to hear it. They got their strength program. They know what they're doing. And I'm telling you right now, most of them don't have a clue. They waste their time in there. Okay. This is the secret sauce to great perennial powerhouses. And I used to go around, and I remember going to big football schools, and man, they would have a factory in their weight room. And in their strength coach or their coach, whoever was running it, they knew how to run the room. There was nobody, any good program, you don't go in their weight room and they're throwing out all the worksheets and saying, okay, do this, and then they go read a book in the corner. That's what most people do. No, they know the lay of the land. They know how the room is put together. And they got stations, and they keep guys moving. They're probably going on whistles, and they're charting things like what they've done. So there's progressive overload. They're probably putting stuff up on the wall to get those kids competing against each other and climbing the ranks, doing more pull-ups and more weight and stuff like that. This is a breeding ground for confidence. It's much easier to show up to strength training regularly and start knocking down these little obstacles, climbing the board, doing more pull-ups, doing more push-ups, and you will see kids just develop so much confidence and so much, and they start putting little pennies in the bank, and they get commitment. And then this is a big part of getting kids not afraid to lose or wanting to win. The more, how you build confidence and how you build that kind of it factor people talk about, where you figure out how to win, or you go out there and you see the kids that just do everything they can to win. It's just the more time you put in. So there's so many little pieces to a good strength program that can do all of these things that most people that think they know what they're doing have no clue about. They think it's all about exercises, sets, and reps. And if that's all it's about, and you think you put together this amazing program because it's just it's all based off of these percentages and this and that, you're missing the boat completely. This is truly the secret sauce to good programs. And then on top of that, most people do a horrible job when they're dealing with teams of having progressions lined up. So having a game plan for the newbie that's excited to come out for wrestling, and they show up and they've never strength trained before. Well, and then you throw them under the bar and have them squatting with everybody else that's been doing it for 3 or 4 years, and they can't even do a body weight squat. You got to have a progression that builds up and have a way to plug that progression into the program that you're doing. You got to understand who should be doing body weight training. When should you be lifting for power? When should you be lifting for strength? When should you be lifting for muscular development throughout the year? All of these things need to be understood. If they are understood, if you have a good strength guy that really gets it in your program, man, it takes a program to another level, and it creates, like I said, a perennial powerhouse, because it's what you're doing. What I like to call it is you learn to force athleticism in every athlete that comes in. Not everybody's going to be the Kyle Dake athletic, but everybody's jumping levels every single year, every month, whatever that they're committed to this program. That's. If you're a coach and you don't think strength training during the season and outside of season is important, well, you're missing the boat big time. And if you're a coach that does think it's important, but you just don't really get it, man, you better get with somebody locally that knows their stuff. You better work with somebody or start reading books or something like that, because it's a big difference maker.
Now, also, let's understand, you said if you've got a good strength guy, there are varying degrees of school systems that may have a powerhouse weight room. They may not. They may not have a full-time strength coach. They may not even have anybody on the football staff that really knows how to do it. So from a simple athleticism point, maybe the kids at home don't even have a weight bench or something, but simple things like pull-ups, push-ups, trying to learn, if you can't do a pull-up, a lot of first-year upper weight kids that may not be that athletic struggle with pull-ups when it comes to that whole, remember the old presidential physical fitness thing? I struggle with the pull-ups. So when getting things that can teach, or basically the kids can learn athleticism or be athletic, let's not overlook the fact that the push-ups, the sit-ups, the basic calisthenics are also crucial to this.
Yes. There's no excuse to not be doing this. I like how I say there's two things that are at the core of any good strength and athleticism program. It's consistency and progressive overload. So doing it regularly, don't just do a workout, get on a program that, 6 week, 8 weeks, and that where you're doing it regularly, and then make sure you're writing things down and trying to do more. Try to do more pull-ups, try to get that first pull-up, and then you try to get 2, and then you try, in all those exercises. So consistency and I call it progressive overload, where you're kind of constantly moving forward. I think those are 2 big things. And you could just be doing body weight exercises only and become incredibly strong.
So that wraps up this 6-part topic today. We got these 6 topics getting to game plan before November with Coach Daryl Weber. Of course, information on this available at attackstylewrestling.com. The upcoming 2018 Coaches Clinic Friday and Saturday, October 19th and 20th at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. Again, information there on attackstylewrestling.com. You learn the ins and outs of a successful wrestling coach and program from this guy, NCAA champion, and I think he's pretty good Hall of Fame high school wrestling coach, Daryl Weber. Coach Weber, great to be back in the grind on this thing again.
Yeah, man, I enjoy it. I love. It's like my wife says. She says I like to talk too much. So I guess maybe I do. I love these things.
Well, we're both in the right career choices then. If you get to talk about wrestling and I get to talk to people who talk about wrestling, I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Remember, folks, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Every different thing you can think of as far as where to find the show. And for Daryl Weber, this is Jason Bryant. Say we'll see you next time here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.